Welcome to this special event, Warrior Accountants, Trailblazer Lawyers, and Using the Financial Markets as a Force for Good. It's curated by the Cayman Islands Institute of Professional Accountants, also known as SEPA, and Rewired.earth, especially for Climate Week New York City 2022, which is marking its 14th year. I'm Nick Gowing, founder and director of Thinking the Unthinkable, and I'm delighted to be chairing this discussion today in these tough and demanding times where the way things have been are certainly not the way things are going to have to be in the near future. Well, Gillian Tett of the Financial Times has often quoted talking about warrior accountants. Yes, warrior accountants. It's not just the activists, the politicians and the scientists who are trying to solve the climate crisis. The financial and professional services industry must have an equally important role to play. The warriors in a war to change the way things have been and the way things will have to be in the near future. Well, our webinar today will explore this premise while focusing on the question of how the financial markets, broken markets, as we'll hear, can become the most protective force on the planet. ESG data is not nice to have. It must reveal how a corporation's true impact on people and society is playing out. And in the same way that financial statements transparently demonstrate financial performance, so it is about satisfying the same level of scrutiny. We have expert panelists and speakers drawn from across the wealth management and professional service sectors. The challenge to effectively value sustainable action. Now, why the Cayman Islands? Well, I should just explain that the Cayman Islands, they have around 85% of the world's hedge funds. Yes, 85%. And global assets under management are estimated to be reaching $145 trillion by the year 2025. It is therefore enormous. We'll be exploring the latest ideas that will transform the financial markets, from the potential influence of international financial centers like the Cayman Islands to Rewired.earth's plans to create a global demand signal, and even the latest attempts to properly price nature-based solutions. Well, we have a fantastic live panel discussion for you. First will be Sheree Ebanks, who is CEO of SEPA, speaking to us from the Cayman Islands, followed by some thoughts, robust ideas of what really needs to be done at speed. That'll come from Dan Harris, who's a partner at Chancery Advisors here in London. So, Sheree, the floor is yours for the moment for the opening remarks.
Thank you, Nick. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And thank you all for attending our session of the Climate Group's 2022 Climate Week NYC, the biggest climate event on Earth. We certainly are excited and privileged to participate this year. But I would first like to thank our co-host, Rewired.earth, in bringing you this panel discussion on the roles that not only the accountancy profession plays, but the role that one of the largest international financial centers, the Cayman Islands, can and does play in sustainable finance. Hi, I am Sheree Ebanks, and I'm the CEO of the Cayman Islands Institute of Professional Accountants located here in Cayman. SEPA oversees the accounting and audit profession in the Cayman Islands. It is our mission to serve the public interest and ensure we have a strong, sustainable economy, not just in Cayman, but globally. We are a full member of the International Federation of Accountants, and together with the other 180 members from 135 countries and representing over 3.5 million accountants, we support the development, adoption, and implementation of high-quality international standards. And yes, that encompasses international reporting standards on ESG. So sitting at approximately 6 feet above sea level, the Cayman Islands has a significant amount to lose. Yet we produce a minutia of greenhouse gases relative to our neighbors to the north. While we can and must reduce our own GHG, we can and do create a more significant impact through our financial systems to address the climate crisis than most other countries. During Rio Plus 20 held in 2012, Peter Baker, president of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, said, "Accountants will save the world. And this was followed, as Nick mentioned, by Gillian Tett of the Financial Times, noting in 2013 that warrior accountants will lead the green revolution. As we listen today, we will hear that investors are looking for responsible investments. We will hear the demands made to the investment managers, the issues around rating agencies, and a call for high quality, transparent, reliable, and comparable reporting by companies on climate and other environmental, social, and governance matters. From the accountant's perspective, we need, and again, as Nick has already mentioned, data. We also require fully integrated, standardized reporting on non-financial assets. For too long, we have not recognized Mother Earth for the contributions she has made to the companies we have invested in. At SEPA, we look forward to working closer with Rewired.earth in finding out what matters to our members. Data is key, and it's important for us to know what our membership care about most. In December, our summit Momentum, presented in partnership with the AICPA, we will be rolling out the results of the Rewired.earth survey. So in Cayman, our warrior accountants and trailblazing lawyers can and will be a force for good through our strong financial services sector. The opportunities are real. They are here and they are now. So thank you for attending, and I would like to thank our esteemed moderator, Nick Gowing, our panelists, David Marriage, Staci Scott, Joe Huckle, Rob Gardner, Dan Harris, and Lord McNicol for their participation in the biggest climate event on Earth.
Good afternoon and welcome to this virtual event as part of New York City Climate Week, teasingly entitled Warrior Accountants, Trailblazer Lawyers, and Using the Financial Markets as a Force for Good. My name is Dan Harris and I'm a partner at Chancery Advisors, a specialist law firm in London. We advise financial institutions and investment managers, particularly hedge funds, on what ESG should and should not look like in practice. I'm not one of the trailblazer lawyers on the panel, but I've been asked to say a few words before the main act. In fact, now I think about it, I think blazing a trail may involve some sort of damage to trees or even deforestation, so I'm somewhat relieved that I don't have that epithet. In my allocated 2 minutes, I want to sound a word of caution. We need to be honest about the role of the financial markets as a solution to all our problems. The idea that enough volume of a stock will be sold to drive the share price down and force a board to change course is spectacularly naive. That assumes market participants are rational. If they were, that would make the securities markets perfectly efficient, which they are not. Take the following example. In the late 1990s, many long-only managers were obliged to buy overvalued tech stocks because these stocks made up a large percentage of the benchmark index. These managers were forced buyers. Similarly, for every disinvestment, there is often a buyer on the other side of the trade. One person's toxic asset is another's opportunity to buy an undervalued stock. The markets are a game of musical chairs, where securities often function as cash. However, while the markets do not offer a panacea, they can play a more powerful role than they are currently playing. It is at this point we must consider data. First, we need to mention ESG ratings providers. The unsatisfactory state of affairs with ESG ratings providers has been well documented. Only last month, 17 US states wrote to a single ESG ratings provider expressing certain concerns. More generally, any ratings provider that privileges low quality, biased or unreliable raw data, or underweights or excludes high quality data, can only produce a low quality product. While regulators cogitate on this issue, the market can take immediate steps. Industry bodies should be encouraging investors to demand more from their investment managers on this issue, including due diligence questionnaires and redemption rights if an ESG policy is breached. For an investment manager, blindly deferring to an ESG score as the sum total of your integration of an ESG policy risks liability. On this point, lawyers have overcomplicated the analysis. Everyone uses the term fiduciary duty as if it is some sort of magic formula. But not every breach of duty by a fiduciary is a breach of fiduciary duty. If an investment manager fails to act with reasonable skill and care in connection with the appointment and use of an ESG service provider, it's negligent. Investors are not bargaining for investment managers to outsource and fetter their discretion. They're expecting investment managers to be discerning and look behind the numbers. Investment managers must not simply look for ESG ratings because they're easily and cheaply operationalized. In turn, investment managers should demand more in their contracts from these ratings providers. Improved transparency and meaningful representations and warranties regarding bias, conflicts and probity. Second, data at a macro level is also important. Places like the Cayman Islands, through which a significant proportion of the world's investable capital flows, have a golden opportunity to capture and collate valuable data. This might include how much capital is being reallocated towards ESG issues, whether investment managers are using negative screening or positive screening, whether this is driven by cost or analysis as to the appropriate tool, whether ESG activity has a higher correlation when the fund manager has had positive performance, whether ESG is positively or negatively affected by geopolitical factors, such as wars. This kind of macro data does not exist anywhere in the world, but policymakers surely need it. For investment vehicles already making annual returns, collecting it is easy. I firmly believe that the Cayman Islands can be a global leader in this area. And remember where you heard that idea. These issues are best tackled by warrior accountants and trailblazer lawyers, both offshore, where many of these vehicles are housed, and onshore, where these vehicles are managed. I hope you enjoy the event.
Thanks very much indeed, Dan. I'm still intrigued by this phrase of trailblazer lawyers and warrior accountants. And Sheree, thank you as well for the perspective you've given us and the kind of things you've put on the agenda. And I just underscore what Dan was talking about the danger of being spectacularly naive, about the risks to liability, about lawyers overcomplicating the issues. But there must be much greater transparency and greater data in all of this. Well, let's now move on to our next speaker, who is David Marriage. David has double responsibilities, really, because David, you are the originator of the Rewired.earth paradigm, but you also have a day job as disruption and innovation lead partner in sustainability at PwC in London. But you're talking about a broken market.
Yeah, no, very much so, and thanks, Nick, and hello, everyone. I suppose one of the things that we've been looking at, and part of the reason we've been working with other organisations across the market on Rewired.earth, is really starting to look at some of these data issues that we're facing as a market and how we might go about solving them. But I think it's probably worth me just sort of, in terms of the opening comments, just sort of describing the way that we think about the problem. So what we're seeing is, if you like, a problem the market's never really seen before at this scale and speed, and that's a shift in demand. Now, if I describe that in a little bit more detail, historically, as market users, as consumers, would go to the market looking for the highest quality product, lowest price, and as investors, we look for highest return, lowest risk. But increasingly, we're seeing that demand side signal shift. So as consumers, increasingly, we're looking for high quality product, low price, but we want to save the planet and society as we make those purchase decisions. and we're starting to factor that into our purchase consumer behavior. But we're also seeing that in an investment perspective, where as an investor, we still want high return, low risk, but increasingly we're seeing people want to save the planet and society when we're making those investment decisions. And we're seeing that through sort of the ESG, the growth in ESG funds. Now, if you look at the Bloomberg numbers, they're talking about 50 trillion of assets by 2025. There's a lot of debate around what the actual number really is, but it's a big number, regardless of what the actual number at this point is. But the problem for us as a collective, as a warrior accountant, if I'm going to use that phrase, is that essentially the market's been optimized on the historic ask. So we have full transparency through the supply chain on the finance data, because every profit, every cost through the supply chain is captured in one number, the price on the last invoice at the top of that supply chain. We bring that together with our revenues and we create financial statements, and we have accepted accounting practice, whether that's US GAAP or IFRS, but globally we know what's in every balance, every note, every statement. We audit those because there is a standard, and those audited statements are given to the market on a given day, and everyone has democratic access to that data. None of those statements are true for sustainability data. We don't know what's going on in the supply chain. We don't know whether the cobalt in my phone was supplied by, mined by a small child who died the next day, or was mined by an adult whose child's in school, who's got access to the right healthcare equipment, etc., and a fair wage. Until we do, we don't know the social impact. And the same is true on carbon and biodiversity. But the issue for companies is neither do they. So what happens is they create sustainability reports, and those sustainability reports are mostly qualitative, and those qualitative statements are then interpreted by the data aggregators, data providers, so Bloomberg, Refinitiv, Sustainalytics, Arabesque, and MSCI. Those interpretations are often wildly different, and so whilst everybody's trying to do the right thing for the right reasons, there's no consistency because there is no standard. Because there is no standard, they can't be audited, and they're drip fed into the market on a basis of essentially who can afford to pay for that data set. So essentially you've got this disconnect. Both of those are price sensitive. One has got really high quality data, one has got not very high quality data. And one of the things we're missing is, in terms of creating the shift that we need to see, is what actually the demand signals are and making those clear. And so I'll just sort of finish in terms of the thinking behind Rewired.earth is essentially, as we start to understand those demand signals, what do we really care about when we're investing? What do we really care about when we're buying things? If we're able to create a value pool, and what we've done with various research across the market is we see that 90% of people care about climate action, as an example. Within that, if we know there's a 50 trillion value pool, there's a 45 trillion value pool that will respond in some way to climate action. That means that share prices go up for those organizations that demonstrate to be doing the right thing. That means we need clarity through the supply chain to access that, but there is also a link to custom capital and debt for those organizations that are able to demonstrate they're doing the right thing if they can hit those value pools. Essentially what that means is, as you do the right thing as a board, share price goes up, profit increases, your long-term incentive plans kick in, and your directors get paid more. And that's when the market can become a force for good. Back to you, Nick. I think you're on mute, Nick.
Just before we go on to Staci, let me just press you on why do you call this a broken market?
So, and in a market that's not broken, the demand signals are understood and the market can respond to them. And there is the data for people to make an accurate decision around the allocation that they decide to make. At the moment, the data doesn't exist through in terms of the impact side that people are looking for, and the market doesn't get a clear market signal from investors and consumers about what they care about. And so whilst there is an increasing demand requirement that we're seeing, and that we know that is only going to increase more as we're seeing 30 trillion of assets move from baby boomers to millennials in the next 7 years, which as it moves to millennials, it becomes more purposeful. Those demand signals, if we can make, essentially aren't being sent cleanly into the market. So it's a weak signal as opposed to a strong signal. And even if it was sent into the market at the moment, there is no way for the market to respond in kind, because there isn't the transparency through the supply chain at the detailed level from an impact perspective. So the market hasn't got the information flows required to operate effectively, essentially.
Right, so that's your definition of broken. Good, thank you very much. Now, just as I introduced Staci Scott, who's a senior manager at KPMG in the Cayman Islands, let me say we're 20 minutes in and we've got 40 minutes to run. So do send any thoughts you've got. If you want to join the conversation, do it on the chat line and I'll try and inject it into the discussion. So Staci, over to you about how the accountancy profession has really embedded ESG into what it does and what still needs to be done.
Yeah, thank you, Nick, and hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us here today. Before I really delve into the accounting profession in particular, I think it's important to understand, and Sheree and Dan and David and you as well, Nick, have already sort of hinted at this, but it's no longer business as usual for the capital markets or for the accounting profession or legal profession anymore. And part of the reason for that is because we've really, I think, woken up in the last few years, especially to the ESG risks and opportunities that lie ahead, right? And the way that we see that manifesting is through, rising energy prices, social and humanitarian crises that are happening around the world, and even the changing expectations that society has of boards and senior management of companies. We've joked about it a little already, but the term warrior accountants, while it's quite catchy, it's intentional, right? Accountants have long been thought of as the gatekeepers of the capital markets. And as David alluded to, this has been primarily in regards to financial information, but there's a tide coming, and it relates to ESG information now as well. And part of the reason for that is because investors are demanding sustainability disclosures that are just as rigorous as financial disclosures. And some may argue that these sustainability disclosures are perhaps even more important given what's at stake. So I think to dive into the ESG agenda globally, I'll focus a bit on the disclosure standards that have come out in the last year, especially. I'll spend a bit of time talking about what that means for the accounting profession and our clients and how we're responding in kind. So if we look at the ESG standards and disclosure space, there's been quite a bit of activity in the last 5-10 years, but in the last year, what we've really seen that's particularly exciting is a convergence of standards, and I'll name two right now. So the first is the ISSB, International Sustainability Standards Board, which was formed shortly after or perhaps just before COP26 late last year. And the second is the US Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, which published their climate disclosures just a few months ago. So these are obviously two very prominent regulatory bodies. The ISSB actually was founded by the IFRS Foundation, which is, of course, the founder of the IASB, which publishes international financial reporting standards worldwide. So a very exciting development in this space. And while we've seen convergence, we've also seen that there is a lot of information to unpack here. And this is really where our clients are coming to us and where our accountants are coming into this space in a more prominent role, right? There's data infrastructure needs. There's risk policies and practices that have to be put in place. There's upskilling of various stakeholders within the organization. And it's quite a bit of work to do in a relatively short period of time, given that many of these disclosure standards will be effective in the next 12 to 24 months. So in terms of what we're doing from an accounting perspective, the first is obviously educating our people. Across our team of accountants, we're seeing a massive push to educate them on ESG and really embed ESG in everything that we're doing as a firm and as a profession. We're trying to enable people to have a very informed and educated discussion with clients who are coming to us, frankly, for guidance. We've seen some clients who are perhaps a bit farther along, but generally speaking, they're asking questions about what they need to do, how they need to do it, and when they need to do it by. And those are really important questions that need to be asked, and we need to be able to answer them. And then on the flip side, we're also seeing accounting firms and the accounting profession start to develop their own methodologies and their own data infrastructure to be able to support these disclosures and hold them to the same rigor as financial information once those disclosures are effective, as I mentioned, in relatively short order. So I think overall there's a lot of good work that's been done in this space. As with any transition, there's still work to be done, but it's a particularly exciting time for the profession, and I think especially for the profession here in Cayman, where I'm based, given the concentration of funds that we have here.
Let me just pick up, Staci, if I can, and it's the same really question to underpin all of you. You talk about people are waking up, but let me put to you, certainly from my own observation, that some people are really still slumbering. They're kind of somewhere in the middle with one eye open and one eye closed. They're not quite sure which direction this is going. They're not sure whether to get on the train or not? And you talk about the need to educate our people. Do you reckon it is yet past a critical mass?
You know, I think, Nick, you're right. There may be some people who aren't quite sure whether, ESG is a fad and it'll pass, but I think you have that opinion at your own peril. If we look at just recent world events, right? The flooding in Pakistan, the heat wave, we joked about it earlier in Europe this summer and elsewhere in the world. We're past the point of pretending that this isn't happening and that we can't respond to it. And if you ignore this, certainly as a business and as a fund perhaps, you do so at the risk of alienating your investors who care very deeply about this, who are very personally invested, particularly, as Sheree alluded to earlier, if they live in an area that's vulnerable to climate change, for instance, or as David mentioned, are asking questions about where and how the goods that we're buying have been sourced from. So the short answer is you perhaps can ignore it, but you do so at your own risk. And
well, just before I go to Joe for a lawyer's view, and also to Rob as well, Sheree, can I just come to you because I saw you nodding quite energetically when you heard that answer from Staci.
No, I completely agree. I just, there's still so many people that are out there and around. And I mean, I was absolutely appalled. We at SEPA just really started our own ESG committee about 18 months ago. And when we started and started to get people involved, there was a couple of people that asked me, well, what's ESG? And I think after I started, I started this journey and then I actually did a couple of courses. My own ignorance itself, this has been going on and people have been pounding the table for decades and nothing has been done about it. And, we cannot, as Staci has quite rightly said, we can't turn a blind eye any longer. And if people are ignoring it, and I mean, when we think even about living in the Cayman Islands, it's a wonderful place to live, but we are 6 feet above sea level. And, and that's a high part. Most of us, we're at sea level and we're just not going to exist in 20 years or 40 years. So, I think, Staci is quite right. People can turn a blind eye, but, and it's getting to a stage where, we talk about the climate crisis. We've perhaps have a hurricane that might be coming our way next week. It's not something that we've seen so often. The time, I've been in Cayman since I was a little girl, and I can count on my hand the amount of times that we had to really get ready for a hurricane. But now it's like since 2004, they just keep coming at us, one after another. So it's we see it, we live it. We can see, we see what's going on, and I don't think that we are doing things quick enough. People are not working, fast enough.
Not doing quick enough, and certainly, as I can put to you, that I think there's still the same ambiguity and uncertainty about what net zero really means. We don't have to have a long discussion about it now. 2050, 2030, 2025, the urgency is even greater than most people assume, but I just put that into the mix at the moment. So let's get to the lawyer's view, to Joe Huckle, a regulatory partner at Ogier, also based in the Cayman Islands. I hope you'll be safe when the hurricane hits, and whether ESG really is on the agenda for regulatory change in the Cayman Islands, and how could Cayman drive this change and appreciation globally? Joe.
Yeah, I mean, so Sheree has mentioned we do have a huge opportunity here. We have over 28,000 regulated investment funds here, and so Cayman has an opportunity to really shape how ESG develops, how it evolves, and looking at what impact can we have as a jurisdiction, as an alternative investment industry on the global fight against destructive climate change. In my own practice and in our own firm, we've already seen a fair amount of good progress in this space. We were the first offshore firm to develop a purely dedicated sustainable investment funds practice in 2019. And that's enabled us to get involved in some really exciting projects in the funds industry, sustainable water funds, carbon credit funds, social impact lending funds. But really, we're on a cusp right now. ESG is heralded as the fastest growing investment strategy in the financial sector. And when I look at this from a regulatory lawyer's perspective, perspective, my main area of interest and my main area of concern is how should Cayman and how can Cayman regulate ESG? And it's a really important question, because how we regulate it is in a large part going to determine what impact Cayman can have as a global force for good. It's also a very tricky question. When you look across the jurisdictions right now at how ESG is regulated, there is no set approach. There's a lot of inconsistency. And so in Cayman, we're taking the time to make sure we do it right. It's a top agenda item for the government here and for the regulator here. The regulator has already come out recently with an advisory, and they're really looking at ESG at the moment through an investor protection focus and an investor protection lens. And that lends us to thinking, when the regulation comes out, it surely will and hopefully will have elements of anti-greenwashing protection. And so greenwashing is this concept of, it's a form of misrepresentation. It can be a really broad range of what that misrepresentation looks like. It may be an investment fund manager uses ESG terminology inappropriately. It may have ESG terms and phases in its name when really they haven't taken measures to actually implement those policies. But it can go to much more sinister and deliberate deceptive practices around marketing funds. And so when we kind of take a step back and we look at how are we going to regulate, what is it going to look like, we do think investor protection, anti-greenwashing is going to be up there as a core element. But at this time, there is some speculation whilst we take the time to make sure that the way we regulate these funds, the huge amount of capital that is raised that can be put into fantastic projects, is able to be done in the most impactful and the most positive way. I think you might be on mute.
Can I just put something else on the agenda, which is about ESG and whether the current definitions of ESG are really appropriate? What are you seeing, Joe, on this? Because there is quite a lot of pressure to create an ESG 2.0. Some people say they want to dilute what ESG is about. Others say because ESG is conceived a few years ago is already being overtaken by new realities. Is that affecting the judgments that you're seeing?
I mean, I don't think there is a set definition of what ESG means. It can mean all sorts of different things. In one sense, it's great that it's a broad concept because there are so many different ways and angles and approaches that a fund manager can take to have an ESG element in their policy. I mean, what we're seeing is at the moment, we're hearing a lot of talk about ESG kind of being this broader concept really used to look at and focus on risks, about managing environmental and social risks. And then now a narrowing in of sustainability being this narrower concept that goes beyond managing risks and really looks to achieve sustainability related goals. And when we look at this particular topic, climate change and what impact we can have, I think we'll increasingly see focus on sustainability. So the S element of that, going beyond risk management and really looking at what are we trying to achieve here. And hopefully the regulation as it evolves will make sure that there is proper disclosure around that, there is proper reporting around that, and these claims of sustainability and what's trying to be achieved can be properly measured and people can be held accountable for what they're saying they're going to do.
Let me just pick up with you before I go to Rob on this. Again, what do you think is happening on ESG? Is there a need to really define it more precisely in line with the way the market is now beginning to see the way ESG is going?
I think, David, you might be on mute.
No, is that working? It just took a while to come on. Yeah, no, so absolutely. I think it does need to be redefined because actually as individuals, we care about different things. And at the moment, ESG is a nebulous ask. We sort of say, do you care about ESG? And, or we'd like some ESG type stuff, and the market goes, yeah, that's fine. We can do ESG. Nobody really knows what it is. And I think one of the key things is, different people care about different things. Some people might care about climate, some people care about life on land, others equality, others clean water and sanitation or healthcare. But there will be a different mix of that depending on the cohort, depending on the age, depending on the gender, location, etc. And really starting to understand what ESG means to the individual is critical here. In the same way that you'd have a conversation about your financial return and your the profile and how long this is going to take and how you want that to happen, we need to have those similar conversations around the transition that you want to help drive with your money and what you want the things you buy to show. So I think there's an element of that. I think the other thing, just very quickly, is that at the moment, the market cannot do this. It can't look through the supply chain. It has no idea what's going on. And at the moment, as an organization, the more you look, the worse you look. So the more I look through my supply chain and try and understand what's going on to report back to my investment company, the worse I look compared to someone who hasn't bothered. So I think there's if you like, from a whether it's from a fiduciary perspective in terms of the or the fund or the depository or the auditor or the corporate themselves, there are huge amounts of unexploded reputational ordnance, bombs that can go off in your reputation at any point within the supply chain, which you have literally no control over at the moment. What we need to do is create a mechanism by which, if you're not looking, you're red. So basically, you get a really bad score. The only way that you can start to move from red to amber and amber to green is by looking through, understanding the issues and solving them, as opposed to pretending they're not there. But I think it's that connectivity that is fundamental if we're going to start to really move the needle on sustainability and ESG in this broad sense.
Thanks, David. Let me say we've got 20 minutes to run. If anyone out there would like to put a question or contribute to the conversation, please do get a message to us on the chat line. Rob Gardner, you're Director of Investments at St James's Place Wealth Management here in London. What are investors now making of all of this? Because things are changing very fast. Regulation is coming in. Is there a wake-up call still to be issued, or is everyone waking up?
Yeah, well, look, firstly, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And maybe just to put some context about what does that mean in terms of my job, because I feel like I sit end to end from a retail investor right the way through to fund manager, right the way through to investing in a company. So let me put some numbers around that. We have 900,000 clients. We have clients who are babies, so under the age of 1, and we have over 200 clients who are centenarians. So we literally have clients who are the 100-year life. We have clients who work in Aberdeen and have worked their whole life in oil and gas. We have clients who work for Greenpeace. We have clients who work for accountants and lawyers who are passionate about ESG. We've got people who think this is all a woke nonsense and kind of sits with Greta Thunberg and just go back to bed. So we have the full plethora. However, it has been shifting. So in the last 3 to 4 years, we have been seeing that demand from clients shift. So that money comes to us. It's about 150 billion pounds. It's over £1 billion a month that we're having to invest. And then I run the team that invests that money with fund managers. So we then invest with about 40 fund managers around the world that collectively invest $10 trillion around the world, and we have 13,000 different companies, bonds, and properties that we invest in around the world. So at any point in time, we're producing serious amounts of data. Think 40 HD Netflix movies of MSCI data, FTSE data, data from Microsoft, data from BlackRock, climate change data just coming in, and we have to process that, make investment decisions, and then surface that content up in a way that is easy to understand for my daughters who are clients, to my wife, to my mum and dad who are clients. So it's quite a challenge. And so when we think about our clients, I do have different avatars in terms of where their awareness and understanding is on these issues. And it is fair to say, attitudes are shifting, but let's be clear, and this is not a fiduciary point, but clients invest with us because they need to have enough money when they stop working, when they retire. They want to kind of grow their money. So the principal thing that we need to do is take the appropriate amount of risk for them to generate a financial return. If on top of that, we can do no evil, great. If on top of that, we can do good, even better. And our whole ethos at SJP is that sort of financial well-being in a world worth living in. So our core job is to deliver our clients financial well-being. We have to grow their money above inflation over time. But at the same time, as we've all talked about, we live in you know, we've basically been destroying Mother Earth, and in a sort of 40 to 50 year time horizon, we won't have something to live in. So it needs to be a world worth living in. So that is the tension. So there is a big temporal issue here. I wanted to comment on the sort of ESG point. I think it's less about what and more about how. So I think about it on 2 dimensions. And so there's a framework called the spectrum of capital. And you know, if you take ESG data and just screen out companies, I'm not making an active decision. I'm relying on someone else who's done it. And so I'm really taking an output-based decision rather than how do I put it into my input and make decisions. So I think both Staci and Joanne talked about risks and opportunities, and it is exactly that. No company is good or bad in the same way that no human or no team is good or bad. It's understanding what the issues are and how can you engage with those businesses to make them better. And crucially, can you demonstrate that you've engaged with it? So there's a difference between running a low carbon fund where I sold my BP shares, of which we've got about 500 million pounds, and I bought more Microsoft, of which we own £1 billion. That's very different to we're engaging with BP and Shell. You can see us at the board meetings. We're part of Climate Action 100+, and we're saying, where are your net zero plans? Why haven't you signed up to net zero? And then when you surface those plans, we engage with the board and say, well, why you haven't gone enough? And what are you doing here? So there's a difference between owning something and engaging to drive an outcome versus buying some data and sort of selling a stock and buying another stock. So I think here it's the how and the implementation of ESG where the confusion arises, rather than the definition of what ESG is in terms of sort of factors. Or although I do agree with David's point, there are, you know, different clients have different preferences.
Rob, I'm going to quote now from the title of this session, Financial Markets as a Force for Good. How many of your investors really think of the financial markets as a force for good? Because even though green is popular, in many ways it's not yet producing the return.
I disagree with that. I think I mean, first of all, we need to be clear about how are we measuring return and over one time horizon. So I think we need to separate trading from investing. I think investing ultimately needs to be a decade, but let's take 5 years as a time horizon. But we're increasingly, I would say 9 out of 10 of our clients want the businesses they're investing in to not be bad. That is, you know, that's slightly different from pushing further and wanting impact. But if we take our sustainable and renewable fund, which sits more at the impact end of things, where we're saying not only do we want these businesses to generate positive performance and create revenues, but we want to see them having a positive impact, that's our fastest growing fund. And we think that will be a £25 billion fund in the next 2 to 3 years. And so, you know, a good example of that is Xylem, which is a water business that's, you know, solving problems around flooding, changing, you know, how can we reduce the risk of flooding around the Mississippi River? That business has seen compound annual growth rates of its revenues, strong profit, and making a material impact to the kind of cities and counties and places it's working with. Or take Nike and the position it took around Colin Kaepernick 6 years ago at the NFL when he took the knee. They backed him, and at the point that they backed him, they split their client base, and they've made him a sort of social activist piece, and they've really backed specifically the Black community. They've also been really active on adopting what's called the circular economy, so making sure more and more of their clothes are made from reused and recycled business. And look at their revenue growth, look at their profit growth, look at their brand premium. So I do think money can be a force for good, and businesses that are embracing that are doing a good job. And I think the sort of fund managers who can look through, identify the data, and make that will get that performance. I think what we've not done a good enough job of is communicating that data in a clear and consistent way, and sometimes challenging some of the misreporting that happens in the media that sort of helps some of these messages persist.
It's a big challenge, not communicating it. Now we have 15 minutes to run. I'd invite any of you to just jump in about the prospects for where this is going. And so you make your own agenda here. But Sheree, can you kick off? Because in our pre-conversation, you were talking about how in many ways Cayman was about 10 years behind. Can you now make a significant leap even becoming well ahead of other parts of the world, given the vast amounts of cash which are going to be invested in Cayman and the kind of way in which you can operate now?
Thanks, Nick. Yes, I actually do believe we can take a huge, I mean, we can gain that, you know, those years behind we were of other jurisdictions or other international financial centers, because Cayman has all the bells and whistles already in place. We've got the professionals, we've got, and they're based globally. I mean, when you think of from our profession itself, from the accounting profession, we're represented by the Big Four. You know, we can actually pull in the Cayman Islands from these 3.5 million accountants that are out there in the rest of the world, on bringing in all of their knowledge. We've got a great legal fraternity, and they've all been working on it within their overseas offices. But we have built up a financial services industry, which is, I'm going to have to say, and of course I'm not objective at all, but I think it's one of the best in the world in terms of our transparency, in terms of our regulatory system. We've got a very, very highly qualified workforce, and everybody cares deeply about this. And perhaps it is, some of that is because we are actually sitting in the Cayman Islands. So everybody cares deeply. We've got a very excellent community, and when I say community, I mean, we've got a great relationship between the public and private sector. We are a community that we work in partnership with each other, and that is extremely important, you know, when we're approaching things like this. I mean, Joe mentioned before, or mentioned in our pre-discussions, of the work that the private sector is assisting government with in terms of, you know, in terms of making sure that the regulatory environment is balanced, it's right, and it's where it needs to be. Other jurisdictions kind of jumped onto the bandwagon early, and they've got a couple of things wrong. So I think that, you know, we are well positioned to surpass all of the rest of what other people have done. And I see, you know, Joe, I don't know if you want to just kind of comment on that.
Yeah,
I see it from two incredibly talented lawyers and accountants. Joe.
Yeah, I would feel slightly defensive of Cayman and saying it's 10 years behind. I think when you look at the SEC, they've only just come out with proposed rules around ESG regulation. And so I don't feel that we're so far behind. We're in a period of huge regulatory change in Cayman, a lot of it driven by foreign jurisdictions, the EU. And so I think we're keeping pace, and I think it's right that we should be taking the time to get the regulation right. Our regulator here hasn't historically looked at funds and dictated what they can invest in and tried to dictate investment strategies. So we're not expecting that will be a change. But they have focused on investor protection, making sure that operators are clearly managing, mitigating, identifying all the ESG related risks. And so I think we'll see it evolve in that way. There was something kind of slightly off topic that I was interested in that you mentioned, Rob, around a kind of difference between passively holding interests and now potentially getting more involved in almost activist investing. Do you think that the ESG space is somewhere where your job will change and people will expect you to be more active in the management of the assets, interests you're holding for clients?
Just before you jump in, can I just say I'm now getting questions, of course it always happens in the last 10 minutes, from Hannah. Are there any avenues for accounting and legal firms to elevate the conversations around ESG and social development? So there's a really strong focus there on where is ESG taking us, Rob?
Yeah, I suppose I'm not the right person to comment on that, but I will comment on Joanne's one. I think this actually gets to the heart of sort of active versus passive investing. And the crazy thing is passive investing has now overtaken the total size of all bank sort of balance sheets. And it's so if you're a passive investor, you own every single stock in the FTSE 100, you own every single stock in the S&P 500. And actually the goal there is to do it as cheaply as possible. And that's where the sort of criticism of the sort of ESG indices comes in. To do all of the stuff that we talked about, to look at data, to look down, to engage with companies requires more people and requires more fees, and that's active management. And so there is a kind of confluence of these two things. Where the UK regulator, the FCA, is going is they're trying to come up with fund labels. So right now there has been a consultation, and this autumn they're going to come out with a fund label regime between something that sort of has no ESG in it, something that's sort of passively following ESG, or something where you can evidence that you have actively engaged with the companies that you have invested in. So no one's going to say which one it has to be, but what they want to do is sort of separate the difference between, so what happened, one of the big global fund managers had 2 funds and the top 10 stocks were almost identical. And then they said, oh, this fund is an ESG low carbon fund. And all they did is they got rid of their Exxon shares and bought some more Microsoft. There is zero engagement with that. Actually, there's more value to say, no, we held Exxon. The carbon footprint on our fund is worse, but look at all the board meetings that we've had. This is what we have done to engage with Exxon. This is how we're trying to get them to shift and engage in that. And here's the kind of, I think, the challenge is divesting doesn't work. And divesting comes from ethical investing, and that's fair enough. If you have your own values and you don't want to invest in tobacco or oil and gas, that's fair enough. But if you want to drive change, you have to use your voting right as a shareholder. It turns out that if you're a bond investor, you have way more influence over the companies and the CFOs than you think, and use that to drive change in the companies. And what the FCA wants to do is bring out that point so that when you're a retail investor investing in those funds, you understand the difference between them.
Thanks, Rob. I'm just going to pick up on one point. You mentioned Exxon. Do you think there has been a significant change in attitude in Exxon since the engine #1 issue of last year and the attempt and the successful attempt to get at least 3 new people on the board?
Well, I think that the fact that they've got new people on the board will bring about change. I think it's too early to tell. What I can tell you is that there has been a significant change at BP and Shell with Bernard Looney and the new CEO at Shell. And so if you look back at last 5-6 years of BP and Shell, you've seen the engagement, which the Europeans are much further ahead of this than the US, really drive that change. Let's see what happens. But changing board directors is the first place that you start. But you then have to change leadership and culture throughout the organization.
All right, thanks. Staci, I'm going to come back to you, and I'm now getting a lot of questions. So Sangeeta is asking whether we can just stretch a little bit beyond the top of the hour. Is that okay for everybody? It shows people are listening and taking in what you said. Everyone says yes. If you need to go, just disappear. So Staci, let me come back to you about what the impact is, certainly on the professional services and your ability to rise to the challenge. There is a question here from Rikim, a young Caymanian, if I'm putting that correctly. Are there positions within organizations that properly address these fast developing issues? Staci.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and thanks, Rakim, as well. So like Rakim, I am Caymanian as well. I'm personally invested in this, and I'm very proud that many of the firms here in Cayman have started to respond to this. I think the way that we've done this is sort of like 2-pronged. So I alluded to it earlier, we're embedding ESG throughout the organization. So when you ask whether there's a specific role for it, there is, but I think every role within the organization is considering ESG and responding to that accordingly. And when I look at perhaps creating a subject matter expert field, I actually sit within our ESG advisory team at KPMG. So we're among the first of the firms here in Cayman to start to develop a team that literally does this every single day. So we're working alongside clients to help them address their ESG issues, to respond to the challenges and the risks and opportunities, and ensure that they are ready to make meaningful change. So the short answer to your question, Rakim, is yes.
And I would say that we approach this, I think there's certainly ways that accountants and lawyers can help raise the profile, drive the agenda. And there's 2 ways that we do it. One is in Cayman, because it is a smaller community in terms of number of people, there's a real opportunity here to get involved in driving and shaping the regulation, meeting with government, meeting with the regulator, helping educate on what we're actually seeing in practice, what does industry want, and speaking to our clients and making sure that the end result that we get is reflective of what is going to work. And then the other is, as you mentioned, Staci, in response to the question around are there full-time roles. I think there are organisations that do have full-time roles. We have some full-time roles here, including a full-time global sustainability officer, and their full-time job day in, day out is looking at all the kind of issues that David mentioned around supply chain, where are we getting our paper from, etc. And so there are definitely opportunities to really look not just at how we can help our clients, but look at ourselves as a business. And we're in Cayman. Most of our offices are in offshore jurisdictions that are small islands, so waste disposal and pollution of the seas, etc., are all issues. And so we, as a global organisation, have full-time people looking at that. And I'm sure many of the other organisations do. And the other thing I would say, sorry, quickly, is we have a committee that I'm a member of, which is actually called Pioneering Audacious Change. And our top agenda item on that is environmental and sustainability issues. And that's where we look at all these supply chain issues. And it, as David mentioned, the kind of more you go down the rabbit hole, it's never ending looking at what you're doing and where things are coming from. But it's a very exciting and interesting investigation.
Yeah, and I suppose just very, very quickly, I think one of the things that we're seeing in the regulatory space globally, and this is where accountants and lawyers can, I think, step in, is collectively there is a focus on climate change's impact on a company. So as the sea rise, my factory floods, therefore there's a contingent liability, a cost, therefore I'm going to factor that in. Very few of them concentrate coherently on what's the company's impact on climate change. And actually, as an investor and as a consumer, that's really what I care about. When I buy my laptop, I don't go in thinking, I wonder if the factory that built this is going to flood tomorrow. What I think is, I wonder what the impact was. What was the social impact? What was the environmental impact of me buying this laptop? And increasingly, we need to think about where we're creating regulation, where we're thinking about creating data. It's actually got to answer the demand signals that we're getting from investors and consumers. And if it doesn't, it's pointless. So I think we just need to take a bit of a step back collectively as an industry, set of industries, but also as large organizations globally, and really think about what we're trying to achieve and who we're achieving it for. We provide financial data, so we give the right information to people like Rob, so he can make decisions around the financial information of an organization. When we're providing sustainability data, we should be providing information to those people that want to make a difference when they're making those investments. And actually that means that we need a different set of data, not just at the entity level, but through their supply chain, because that's the real impact of how we're making our money and how we're making those products. So it's just a thought in terms of, I think there are some other things that we probably need to do as a set of lawyers and as accountants to really start to drive the agenda to make sure it's meeting the needs of the market.
Also the expectations of the public. And that brings me on to a question here from Chris. It was introduced at the start that nature-based solutions could help accelerate change across the market. How will this happen? I'd like to give you a personal observation. We know we had the Dasgupta report of last year before COP26, which really created a different set of thoughts coming from Glasgow. I'd put to you that actually it's diluted, particularly because of Ukraine. Therefore, the imperative on nature-based solutions isn't as acute as was indicated and signaled should happen in Glasgow. Who'd like to pick up on that? Rob?
Yeah, so actually, with a different hat, I'm a board director of a company called Rewired.earth, which is trying to do exactly that. So the problem is threefold. The sort of narrative of consume less, fly less, eat less doesn't work. It's politically contentious. I mean, we did touch on it, but the truth is, if you talk about climate change too much, you are perceived to be sort of Democrat or left or woke. I've been described as woke Greta Thunberg many a time. And so that kind of consume less narrative is struggling. The shift to renewables, the shift to the circular economy is building momentum. And I think despite the Russia-Ukraine is moving, I have concerns about the pace, but I think this is where finance can really drive that. There's trillions of dollars committed to driving that. But the third thing is we don't sequester, i.e. suck CO2 out the air. So we're producing 40 gigatons of CO2 this year. It doesn't look like it's slowing. It turned out that when we had a global pandemic and we stopped ships and we stopped flying, it took a small dent out. And there's this triple negative convexity. So humans cause climate change, humans cause biodiversity loss. So in my lifetime, we've destroyed 70% of all nature on the planet. Whales, elephants, I mean, it's horrific. Then climate change makes it worse and kills it even more. And the very thing that can save us and protect us, nature, that can suck CO2 out the air isn't doing that. And so, yeah, Nick's absolutely right. And it's the thing that got me when I was at Glasgow was just how crucial nature is. And nature doesn't even feature in all of the data that we're talking about. There is something coming in which is called TNFD, the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure. In the UK, all new property development from November 2023 will need to show a positive 10% biodiversity uplift, which is a good thing. But the problem is that capitalism and money is a social construct based on supply and demand and price, and nature sits outside of that construct. And so until we put a price and value on nature, and we say an elephant is not worth $40,000 dead for poaching and tusks, but it's worth $1.75 million alive because of the value it does, its ecosystem services, we won't change those behaviors. And so there are companies like Rewired.earth that I'm involved with and many others who are really focused on how do we reverse this? How do we integrate nature and the value that nature brings us into our global economy? And that needs to happen fast because as we've all said, the time is running out.
And I think, Nick,
if I could just make a point, David, just one thing. I'm just about to say, so we're rewiring Earth and we're rebalancing Earth. If anyone would like to make a due disclosure on anything else they're doing to Earth, please tell us now, because everything is now. So David, come in on that.
And I think, in terms of expediting that sort of activity, if you like, and identifying where, Rewired.earth is a great thing in that actually by starting to fund society to protect the elephants, to ensure that they can continue to sequester carbon, you're actually then creating better jobs, better, reducing poverty, making sure that they've got access, people have got access to food, education, etc. Now, when you think about the sort of, if you like, what we're doing with this markets are doing with Rewired.earth, what you're trying to create is a set of, okay, who cares about what and where does the value pool sit? Now, what we're working with organisations like Costain who are building HS2 in the UK, they're able to reduce their carbon to a certain level, but not completely. So one of the things we're looking at with Rewired.earth as an example is actually if you can offset that last little bit of carbon that you can't offset in, can't get rid of as a process when you're building the high-speed railway in the UK. But as part of that, you're essentially funding, better educational outcomes, societal impact as well. You're essentially creating a link to multiple different demand signals from different people who care about different things through the supply chain. And to Rob's point, at the moment, most NGOs and organisations that are doing the right thing are sitting outside the supply chains. What Rewired.earth enables you to do is bring that into the supply chain because it creates value. It basically greens your squares, if you like, in terms of the way the Rewired.earth thinks about it. But in doing so, you access more customers, you access more capital, you access more talent. You get paid more as a director because your long-term incentive plans kick in. But the point being is that actually you're starting to really join up, those organisations that are trying to move the market as a force for good. And I think it's that bit where, by creating the right demand signals and the right transparency, it drives it drives the sort of continuation of the work that people like Rob and Waleed are doing at Rewired.earth to really transform, the opportunity to increase biodiversity and increase carbon sequestration.
All right, we've got another 10 minutes to run, so we're running over that, but that's because we've got other good questions coming in. It's linked to what we've just been talking about, but let me ask you to take it one stage further, particularly related to being warrior accountants and trailblazer lawyers and trying to create a force for good. This from Kiona. Will the financial industry ever move beyond profit as the primary indicator of success? Who would like to come in on that? Rob, will you? Okay, David.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think, the issue at the moment is, if you think about the way boards see this, they see sustainability at one end of the spectrum and value at the other. And sustainability is some sort of overhead, philanthropic action, regulatory burden, and all of those things are in direct opposition to value. And so therefore, at the moment, you either decide to create, profit and value, or do sustainability, and there's then a balance between those two. And there are some cases, as Rob's outlined, where those two things align and it's all great. Part of the reason for that sort of disconnect, if you like, is that whilst there is increasing demand signals, they're currently weak. And so what we need to do is create a model by which, by doing the right thing, you create more profit. So profit might still well be the primary answer, but the only way you can access high profits, high value, in terms of return, the only way you can do that is by being sustainable. And the reason being is that banks are looking to reduce their exposure to financed emissions. You'll get cheaper debt if you do the right thing. Tax authorities are looking to create differentiated tax based on whether you're doing the right thing from a climate perspective. So you'll pay lower tax. But if you understand your customer base and what they care about, and you're able to deliver the right sorts of products with the right sort of sustainability framework and credentials, then you'll sell more products as increasingly people care about the impact and as they see it more visibly. So essentially, you're still seeing probably profit as a driver, but the only way you create sustainable profits is by becoming sustainable. So it becomes
right,
one.
David. Okay, David. Let me get the three views from Cayman. First of all, Sheree, and then Staci and Joe, about how much your clients are willing to change their attitude of why they're investing, particularly whether it has to be about profit in the way that it's been defined in this question. Sheree.
Sorry, you caught me off guard a little bit. Well, sorry, I'm coming at it from the NGO perspective, and we're sort of a regulatory body for the profession. But obviously, all businesses, and as David had alluded to, they look at the profits, what I was going to say, hard profits first, and that the ESG side is just some kind of an add-on, and it was a nice to have that the boards needed to consider. And I think until we get to a place where all boards understand the importance of the environment and social, that is what's going to be driving profits going forward, not the financial statements and how much services and whatever you do. Because if you don't do it, if you don't make that shift, just generally from an economic standpoint, the rest of the world will make it for you. So if you don't take the move to build your profits, to build your income and expenses around an ESG sort of framework, I mean, when we go back and you take a look at basic economics, the economics books pretty much need to be rewritten because they were all based on, hard profits. We've got to now take into consideration the ESG factor, and if you don't, so you have to shift away from that. It's going to happen. Otherwise, your profits is your primary indicator of success. It's going to be a different type of a profit. I'm not sure if that made any sense. But
Let me check in with Staci on that.
Yeah, I think both Sheree and David sort of hit the nail on the head. I don't think that profit and sustainability are exclusive. In fact, quite the opposite, right? And Rob alluded to it earlier. When you're investing with a longer time horizon in mind. So when you make a purchase today, or from an investing perspective, you can't just think about what's happening with this investment in the here and now, but 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, when you go to divest, will it be profitable? And whether or not it's profitable will have a lot to do about how the world has changed, right? And whether it was a sustainable investment, and sustainability has been embedded throughout it. So if you don't consider them as complementary, you will in time actually risk further profit. So I don't think that financial indicators are the most important. I think sustainability indicators work hand in hand with them, and we're seeing a movement towards that.
Your view.
Yeah, I mean, our clients, fund managers, fund sponsors, are driven by their investors. They're essentially trying to raise capital, and then once they've got that capital, they need to keep those investors. So that's where the returns come in. But the part of raising capital is driven by investors, and investors are increasingly interested in ESG. European investors and younger generation investors in particular are interested in it. And so to the extent that is their driving force, that is going to be the driving force and what our clients need to look at.
Well, a quick coda here from you.
I just want to say a great case study is Ford, the motor company car. It's been on a 20-year terminal decline. New CEO came in and said, we need to pivot away from internal combustion engines, move to electric vehicles. So this is not Tesla. This is This is Ford, been around a long time making cars. They make trucks called Ford F-150s, the best-selling car in North America. And then they pivoted that and they created the F-150 Lightning. It then became the best-selling car in the US last year. It then sold out again, and they sold out again. He had to keep coming on, and the CEO had to keep coming on and saying, this car's so popular, we keep selling, and their share price re-rated. So I just want to sort of just give that as a real example of actually when the point that David was talking about of creating that value. This was a business that was on long-term decline and has reversed its fortunes by seeing it as an opportunity. So it is risk, but is an opportunity. So I just wanted to bring it to life with that case study.
All right, well, look, thanks all of you for your contributions. We've run 10 minutes over. We've got a couple of things to show you before we wind up, but I'd like to thank you enormously, not least for being very frank, not in particular about the imperative and what is expected, particularly with the demands of sustainability. And certainly the science is getting even more sinister when you look at the latest material that's being produced, which was published in Science last week. The urgency is even greater than it was in the IPCC reports of February and April. So there's no time to lose, and anything that can be done on the regulatory side, I think everyone will welcome that enormously, including those who are invested in Cayman. Now, what I'd like to do is introduce Lord McNicol of West Kilbride, who's talking from London. He's not only a member of the House of Lords, he's also co-founder of Rewired.earth.
Thank you for the introduction. It's clear that climate change is already having a deeply destructive impact on people and our planet. We urgently need to change the way we live to protect the environment and our communities. As we've heard today, no one person or company can solve this alone. It requires global collaboration and a financial market that is able to properly value our planet and reward businesses for sustainable action. I got involved with Rewired.earth because they are developing the technology and a data approach that is needed to rewire the current system. Not just words, but brilliant people coming together to build practical solutions. We've got a long way to go, but Rewired.earth, as an independent, not-for-profit, brings a level of transparency to sustainability that can rebuild trust across the financial markets. Developed globally, our app will give citizens a voice, and as David said, businesses a financial incentive to change. I'm incredibly grateful to Sheree and Sept for inviting Rewired.earth to co-host this webinar for Climate Week NYC. And Nick, it's a real honour to have your wise and honest voice helping us to navigate these contentious issues. While there is work to do, I think we've seen today that Sept can play an important leadership role in creating the right market dynamics to accelerate change across the globe. Thank you to the panelists for your generous contributions today, and let's work harder to ensure that warrior accountants and trailblazer lawyers have the tools they need to really change the world. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. And I should add as well that there will be a data mining operation by Rewired.earth, which is going to be produced at the Momentum Conference in December, which we haven't mentioned so far. So thank you all very much indeed, not least for maintaining the spirit and the pace, which meant that we've run over by 15 minutes. We've been going for an hour and 15 minutes. Thank you to all. We're going to finish with something from David and your daughter Ruby, David, which launched the Rewired.earth initiative and was filmed in the Natural History Museum in London. The original version was first played at the City of London's Corporation's Green Horizon series in the lead up to COP26 in November of last year. And I leave you all with some hope, some optimism and inspiration. And I think we've heard a lot of where things are going at some considerable speed on how the financial markets can be a force for real change and for good with those warriors we started talking about right at the top an hour and 15 minutes ago. Thank you all very much indeed. Let's just look at the video.
Dad, will animals alive today end up like the dinosaurs?
There's now 8 billion people on the planet. That's 3 times more than when your nana was born.
So does everything we use harm the planet?
Some things do more than others. We know the price of a product, but sometimes we don't know the true environmental and social impact of making it. To really understand the impact, you need to understand the impact of each part of the product, wherever it comes from. So you look at the whale, for example, if you think of it as a plane, and it's got, you could get the nose from one company, the tail from another company. Actually, every bone within the body could come from a different company, and that's known as the supply chain. If you added those all together, then you'd know the impact of the product, and you could give it some sort of rating.
So it's a bit like a star rating on Amazon?
Yeah.
So then people would know if it's bad to buy from, and then they wouldn't?
Exactly. If investors, so people that make money out of investing in companies, stop investing in companies with a bad rating, then, and we as consumers stop buying things from those companies, what that means is that the share value and the value of those companies drops like a stone.
And so the companies that are doing the right thing get more money?
Yeah, more and more money will flow towards sustainable businesses. The problem is that when it comes to environmental and social impact, there's no common language to share the information with investors and consumers. So Ruby, meet the father of taxonomy, Carl Linnaeus. He solved a similar problem 300 years ago. There was no consistency in the way that animals were named or plants. And so he created a global standard that covered all living creatures everywhere. And we need something of similar scale and ambition to help us save the planet. As more investors only give their money to companies that protect the environment, we need a better quality of data to ensure that their wishes are being followed all the way through a company's supply chain. Up until now, the tech houses, asset managers, banks, corporates and accountants have been spending millions on their own solutions. Nobody can solve this problem on their own.
We need to work together like we've done during the pandemic.
Absolutely, and we need to do that in parallel with those setting the standards, rather than wait for them to be set. What do you reckon Charles Darwin would make of it?
I think he'd want us to do whatever it takes to slow down global warming, to divert all the money towards building a global data platform where verified impact data for the whole supply chain could be shared with consumers and investors.
Sounds like you've got a plan.